even if something has been done, doesn't mean that it's done on the best way at the moment.
Welcome, guys, to the fourth episode of the Entrepreneurial Mindset. My name is Babe.
And I'm Edward. Today we're joined by another member of the Jenny family, Gabriel, who is one of the 5 key advisory board members with a whole background in the entrepreneurial space. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you guys for having me.
Yeah, so for the audience listening at home, do you mind just giving us a quick intro into who you are and sort of what you do in your time to time?
Yeah, sure. Well, my name is Gabriel Guedes, but I go by GG, so it's much easier for everyone.
Yeah.
I'm currently COO and CFO at Leica, which is a healthy dog food company that does direct-to-consumer distribution. But before that, I spent about 10 years as a management consultant at Bain & Company.
Oh, that's great. We mentioned before that you were part of the advisory board for Jenny. How did that come to be?
Well, I got involved with Jenny as a mentor first. So was with Jack back in the day as a mentor on the Initiative 48, and then to some of the other events. And at some point, got closer to Jack and sort of became a personal advisor for Jack, until there was a point where there was some roles in the GE board formally. And then Jack invited me. I was very fortunate to have him thinking of me. And then the rest is history.
Yeah.
Wow.
So when you started off as a mentor, was that something that you thought was just going to be a one-off, or did you just have some sort of feeling that you'll be sticking along with Jenny along the way? And what actually made you want to stay within that sphere of, continuously being a mentor for all those high school students along all those events, but also to carry it all the way through into becoming an official board member as well?
Yeah. Well, when I started, I guess one obviously wants to stay long term, but it's hard to assess, to know from the beginning.
Yeah.
But I think what made me stay was the quality of the organization. So it's something that I wanted to be part of, and I felt that the work that was being done is serious and sort of being impactful and changing lives of the students who went through the program, and that made me want to continue engaged. And then one thing it ends up leading to the other. I think sort of passionate about the mission, therefore you spend more time with the organization, and then spend more time with the leadership, and then one thing led to another. So yes, I guess with the why I stayed is because the way that the organization impacts people, and I see that the passion from the team as well in making this happen. So that makes me want to help as much as I can.
Right. So just it kind of all worked like together, sort of you were influenced by that. And then also I know personally, like it's might sound weird to say this, but I think Vabe and I knew of you, Gigi, before even this call, because we actually had to edit a lot of promo material around I-48 and that sort of stuff. And so we saw you in videos and photos, and just how much of an impactful role that you played. And not only that, but I think we've heard quite a bit from Alan and Esmond and Jack, just how influential you have been. And so I think it goes both ways, which is great to hear that Jenny's both played a role for you and that you've played a role for us. But along those lines, so apart from also being a Jenny board member, I know that you've had a wide array of volunteering experiences. And so I was just wondering, how much of an impact do you think that these volunteering experiences has played in your sort of personal development within the entrepreneurial space? Just because I know most people usually emphasize organizational work. You know, you should get a job, something that you get paid for, rather than the volunteering side, which isn't talked about as much. And so, like, how important do you think that's been for you overall?
Yeah, no, that's a very good question. Because I did my career as a sort of more, I started my career as a more traditional career in some senses, going for corporate, working as a management consultant for so many years. And I think that working in two things actually brought me into this startup space. One is my partner, Anna, founded Leica back in 2018 and starting her own entrepreneurial journey, which I was helping on the sides back in the day. And the second one was indeed the sort of more pro bono or helping some non-for-profits that had this startup spirit on them, right? So Jenny obviously being the most the important one, the one I have been involved the most. That certainly helped me to personally get more into the ecosystem, get to know the people more, get to know the themes that get discussed, and obviously balancing between that plus my knowledge as a management consultant plus my experience in supporting Leica from the beginning. I think that definitely helped shape the advisor that I am today and even the investor that I am today in the startup space.
Right, yeah. And so I think, as you've personally touched on, is like something like the experience that you've had, like, and I guess the wisdom that you gained over the years, I guess wouldn't be as fruitful as it is now if you haven't had that volunteering side, and if it was just following that sort of traditional sort of organizational role, which isn't to say that it's a bad thing, but I think, you know, it's like recommended that if you can expand.
Yeah, correct. I think obviously being a management consultant, you're dealing with a different level of scale in terms of the companies you're supporting, which are usually ASX 100 companies or global companies. So translating, or not everything that is applicable at that level translates well to the early stage startup ecosystem. Therefore, there are some things that are useful, but it's important to get some other types of learning and or different sources, I guess.
That's true. For context, what I was wondering about was how come Leica came to be? What initiated the creation of Leica?
Mm-hmm. Well, Leica, the company, started with Leica the dog. So Leica is our dog, Anna and mine. And back in 2015, Leica was having some health issues. And she was very young still. She was like 6 years old and was already having some health issues. And the vet said that she needed to remove some of her teeth, for instance. And that's when we started cooking for Leica at home. And then we saw how Leica improved and how well she did. And at the time, Anna was living in San Francisco. She saw that in the US, there were some companies that could provide similar services for Leica, and then it's much more convenient way, like than cooking every Sunday. You spend your trying to cook for a dog for the whole week. And then we saw there was an opportunity that's a product that is very helpful, and we saw as customers of that product that's very good. Then when we came back to Australia, 2018, before coming back to Australia, we're looking, is there anything like that in Australia? And there wasn't. Therefore, we understand that, okay, there's a market opportunity here because we see the value of such a big product that's so helpful in the US, while Australians that are so passionate about their dogs, very good, passionate about lifestyle and being healthy, there was a market gap. And that's when we moved back to Australia that we launched Leica, the company.
That's very true. Right. Then how does like a common question in like entrepreneurial spaces, how do you then differentiate yourself from competitors? Maybe building upon that on Leica or like just in general as well?
Yeah. Well, building upon Leica, I think Leica has two main things versus traditional dog food. One is, well, have a superior, healthier product, which is something that I guess translates to any startup, right? If you're going to build something, it needs to be something that the customer wants and is a better product than what's out there. Leica definitely was a pioneer in Australia for healthy diets. And now you can see more and more the space is sort of transforming, but all started sort of back in 2018 when Leica brought the concept. And on the other hand, we also innovate on the channel because we are direct to consumer. Also something that now we might, after almost 2 years of COVID, or 1.5 years of COVID, we are now saying that take for granted e-commerce, but back 2018 as well was some innovation on bringing the product direct to consumer on a subscription basis. So if you generalize that to other startups, means that you need to have a product that will really be fundamentally different to what's out there, and the customers will believe it's better. Can be obviously the case of Leica is a physical product, but can be an app, it can be a software, can be a service.
Right. Yeah. I think that's also a notion that's like not as discussed as much, because when it comes within the entrepreneurial space, one thing that is amazing, especially with Leica, is that you were a pioneer in that space, which is so good to hear. But I think a lot of other startups or people that want to create a startup, they have this notion in their minds that they do need something that's never been done before. And especially today, that can be quite tricky. But like you said, it wasn't only that you were the first, but that it's not like that you created the concept of dog food, right?
Yes.
It's that you created a much healthier and better version than the generic versions of dog food product out there. And so for those that are listening, it's an opportunity that, you know, it doesn't just have to be a novel thing. It can be something that's already been done, but just much better. And so
correct. I think and I would complement that even something has been done doesn't mean that it's done on the best way at the moment. Like if you take dog food, for instance, has been around for almost 100 years now, processed dog food. And I think people took for granted for many, many decades that that's what you feed dogs. And Leica brought a different view on the same product. And I think that can be extrapolated, I guess, to many different markets, right? Every market that has been around at some point was innovative. And over time, many of them sort of start not fulfilling the customer needs as they used to be before. And the trick here is always to identify something that the market needs and people want to do different, not just doing differently for the sake of doing differently and inventing a product or necessarily trying to create a need that does not exist. But there's plenty of opportunity out there. I think you said, Seth, Edward, that particularly now people might feel that's difficult because virtually everything exists. But I'd also say that virtually now is the best time to identify opportunities, because now there are so many ways to do things differently. Every single market can be done differently, and there's lots of technology and niche markets as well to be explored. I think if anything, nowadays exhibits more opportunity than they would exist, say, even 20, 30 years ago, given that there's more access, there's more bigger markets, there's more tools available.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, that's very true. I think one bit that you mentioned on the bit that dog food, you know, has been processed for like the last 100 years or so. How were you able to make a dent in that market when, you know, people were so accustomed to dog food for so long? Because in my mind, personally, at least, I just think that, you know, oh, it's just dog food. That's just how it's meant to be. I at least I don't own a dog. I'd like to in the near future, because they're just amazing. But like, how as a customer would you know that, like, oh, this is bad for my dog, or that, you know, I need to change that up when it's, you know, been the status quo for so long? I was just wondering, is it word of mouth, or is it advertising, or so like, how do you sort of crack through that?
Yeah. No, it's a very good question. That's a question that obviously we think a lot about it. There are, I think, two main pieces here. One is what the company can do about it, which I think that's where you're going. Leica ends up doing a lot of our marketing and advertising is about education. So educating our customers on what our product is, how to use it, why is it better, why it's better for a dog to have a healthy diet. But on the other hand, there's also an underlying market trend that's not like we are going facing an uphill battle. As people get more health conscious, they also started to think about not only their own health, but also the dog's health, because they say, I eat healthy, I eat whole foods, I exercise, I do all the things I can to get my healthy diet and a balanced life. Why shouldn't my dog not also live the best life the way I live, right? So many people are actually starting to move this direction and start to research and only meet what Leica has to offer, that is education and sort of explanations why it's a better diet. Those can go together. And I think a third or a subset of the second factor is as well, the more processed dog foods over time are getting as well, sort of the quality of those foods in general, like as an average of the market's getting lower and lower as obviously time passes, optimization of supply chains, optimization of production, optimization of sourcing. We see worse and worse ingredients being used, which obviously cause the dogs to have even more health effects, which makes many of the owners to sort of question, what am I feeding my dog? Why are they getting sick, or why they're not as healthy as they could be, or they're not at the prime health?
Right. Yeah. So it's just sort of a recurring process, and that as like that emphasis on the education, which is obviously what we do at Jenny as well, right? We're emphasizing on that sort of the freedom of entrepreneurial education, just because the access isn't there at all. So it's amazing to hear that you're not just pushing to sell the product, but just general health education for people's dogs as well.
Yeah, correct. And I think just to complement that as well is like, there is an importance that we should not understate the importance of the market shift. And that's what I'm saying here for Leica, but I guess for our audience, everybody who is thinking about being an entrepreneur, being too early is also the same as being wrong in some senses. Because if you are fighting this uphill battle, trying to put a new customer trend or a new way to consume a product that the customers are not ready yet, that's not gonna, or you'll be very costly to be able to do it. Few companies have the capital and the muscle to sort of push this through. And they usually are going to be very large companies, say like Apple, that brings innovative products to the market that the customers might not even think they need before. But starting a small company from the bottom up, that's a much harder process to go through if you don't have the market trends behind you.
Yeah, and I think it's definitely an interesting point that you're saying to try and not to muscle it through, and to, I guess, just embrace what most people are going through now.
Or more than that, I'd say when you're a good trait for a founder is not necessarily well, obviously they need to have the sturdiness to muscle through if you need it.
Yeah.
But also understand very well their market, the customer, and therefore make a product that can fit that and can sort of move together with the trends that are happening. And ideally identify those trends before everybody identifies it, right? And that's where a lot of value can be added in creating something that's innovative for a new market segment that's growing. And then over perhaps a decade, that market segment perhaps becomes the whole market, which is what we believe that should happen with the dog food. Everybody should eat something that's, or every dog should eat something that's healthier than what they're doing today.
Yeah, I totally agree. And on that note of trends, because you actually brought that from America, you mentioned you were in San Francisco to Australia. And so I guess a bit more of a light-hearted question is, I know that you've had a background across multiple countries. Which do you think is a country that's been severely underrated in your travels? Because you often hear people talking about like, I want to go to Japan or America. Is there any country that you think needs a shout out that is a beautiful place that people should go to?
There are definitely many. So it's hard. I think many of the countries that are or most of the countries that are probably out of the radar, say underdeveloped, and therefore the ease of access and flights and the local tourism industry might not be as good. Many of them, or most of them, actually are underrated. And that's also because the less people that are visiting a certain site, the more likelihood that it is actually more pristine and preserved, right? Depends obviously what you're looking for as a tourist. But if I give it to do a shout out to one country I have been lived on recently, which is pre-pandemic to recently, so perhaps not that recently anymore, is Mongolia. Wow. And it's a beautiful country, still very wild. You can still see lots of wilderness there. Very interesting, different lifestyle and different, very resilient people living nomadic life, and it's beautiful but very hard environment. So I think that country is definitely underrated due to its beauty, to its people, to its different culture, and obviously a very long culture that extends for millennia now.
Mm. Well, building upon that, in what ways do you think your travel experiences to these different countries actually influence and led to how you operate in the business environment?
Well, I think even more than the business environment, I think all these travels, because I have been doing this I did it for 15 years before settling properly again in Australia. They shaped who I am. So it's more than just on the business setting. It set me on a personal level that obviously translates into the business setting as well. But that makes me, I think, somebody who really is open for different perspectives, is definitely looking for, there's so many things that can go differently than the way you plan when you're always on different cultures, different places, different countries, different languages. Therefore, you end up being much more flexible and to change plans, to change the way you work, to change the way or to change the way you react to change. So that's one side. I think the other side is the way I work with people of different backgrounds and cultures. Australia ends up being a very multicultural country. So in particular, just giving Leica as example, we have over 20 different nationalities across our team. So having had this experience of sort of working in a multicultural environment, actually nowadays in some to a lower degree is happening as well inside Leica. And the previous experience I had, I think makes me or enables me to work much better with everyone.
Yeah, so I think if there was any doubt in anyone's mind, once the pandemic eases, I think anyone who had doubts about traveling, please do travel, and maybe to Mongolia if you didn't have a place to travel to in mind. But yeah, I think just it's a really interesting idea that shifted, I think, over the past couple years, especially. I know, especially in the younger generations, there's much more emphasis placed on self-development and traveling. I know it is a shame that we haven't been able to recently, but I know that for me personally, when I could travel to the couple of countries that I did go to, which was Korea and Japan, it was just amazing just to embrace a whole different new culture, different ways of living. It really just shows like how, I guess, little we are within the world and how much more there is to explore. So yeah, I think, shout out to anyone who will plan to travel. But as on a different tangent along those lines, that you've said you've had a lot of a background, not only working across different countries but also within different I guess workspaces, and one of those work lines that we know of is that you're currently an angel investor, as you've mentioned. And so along those lines, as an angel investor, what do you personally look for in a great startup?
Yeah. Well, I think broadly in two different things. One is the market and the other is the founding team. And to elaborate, the market, I'm looking for a market that is big enough to be scalable. Because obviously, as an angel investor, you're looking for something that has high growth and can become potentially large. And to nuance here, I think it's large on a total market, assuming that 20 years down the road, this can be massive, but also on a sort of a more short-term market as well. The things that are, okay, in the next year or two, we'll be able to reach this subsegment of the population. And that subsegment in itself is actually big enough that I can believe that this company, even on the short term, will be able to achieve high growth, which means that while thinking about your startup is not just thinking, okay, the sky's the limit, these are hundreds of billions of dollars of market, but also thinking on the short, small bottom up, okay, this many people can buy this product for this much, that's how many times they buy per year, that's the sort of a short-term market that I believe I can have. So this bottom up, have a solid bottom up view of your next couple of years is very important, that's also realistic. And on the founding team, there are a few characteristics. I think the first one is resilience and this willingness to sort of really build something despite all odds and all difficulties that will be the entrepreneurship path, because it will be hard. There's no way that's going to be something easy. So having this conviction that they really want to do what they're doing, it's very important. The second part would be that these founders do know very well their customer, their market, understand, as I mentioned before, the underlying trends that are happening in the market, what the customers really need, comparison to what's out there. That's very important, particularly good if the investor team somehow is a user of that product, or they have been somehow frustrated with that market and decided to take the problems in their own hands, somehow changing it, which again, to put the parallel to Leica, I think one of the advantages that Anna particularly has is that she's been thinking for this even before she was thinking as a startup. She was thinking about dog nutrition because of our dog that we love, we want to take care for. So the same analogs might exist in many different ways for founders.
I think building upon that, what are then some common mistakes that you see that some young entrepreneurs or founders make that can actually hinder their success to their business? Mm-hmm. Or what are some good aspects that, like good characteristics that they have that can actually create good success for their business?
Yeah. I think there are so many ways that can go wrong, to be honest. And I say that just because statistically speaking, right? Like 92% of startups, unfortunately, will fail in some shape or form. Not to discourage anybody, it's just keep trying different ideas and sort of learn from the previous steps. But I think particularly in the early stages is founders that sort of think that the market's going to be easy to change, very easy to crack without really talking to customers and understanding what their need is. And they might think, okay, this company is going to grow very fast. Think about already when the company is big, that's something I'm excited about doing versus really sitting down and getting the problem cracked from the early stages where it's the hardest. And many founders, or I see some founders already trying to be an entrepreneur because of the glamour or sort of how fancy it is nowadays to be a CEO or a founder, but already thinking down the road how exciting it's going to be versus really wanting or having a good idea that they personally care about so that they can endure the journey.
I think, yeah, definitely like believing in the product yourself is so important, and kind of all the characteristics of major CEOs that exist today, like Elon Musk or even Steve Jobs back in the day. Yeah. Building up. Yeah, Edward.
Sorry, I just had something that I wanted to touch on that I think very similar but like sort of disjointed at the same time. It's like there's like a massive problem in science where scientists have, when they're coming up with a question, they already have the answer in mind, but they're not objectively asking the question and then just trying to follow that, but they already have this answer in mind, and they're sort of biasing towards that. And so I think in that same sense towards startups, it's like some startups have that issue that you mentioned, Gigi, that they have the notion that like, oh, I'm gonna be my own CEO, I'm gonna be self-employed, rather than just focusing on that issue and being passionate about that project that they need to be tackling. And so I think it sort of confounds everything around them, which is a shame.
I think a big part of being an entrepreneur is actually having empathy and actually believing and trying to solve a problem for the mass population rather than your own benefit or gain, or like there's a lot of money in being an entrepreneur. I think, believing in the customer and like actually solving a problem is kind of what leads to successful entrepreneurs rather than unsuccessful ones.
Yeah, and so along that, so you've talked about we've been talking about the investments that you've been making, and so for you on a personal level, what has been the most successful investment that you've made personally? And that could be either monetarily or it could be philanthropically, something that just you knew you were putting out good into the world. So I guess what has been the most successful investment that you've made along those lines?
Yeah, well, I think there are a few, but perhaps I will mention the most. I think the ones I mentioned, that I think most rewarding. So, for instance, we have invested in Upstreet, which is Australian Sydney-based startup that does fractional shares as loyalty program rewards. And I think that's very fulfilling, because this startup, instead of rewarding customers for their loyalty with, say, points from a supermarket chain or airline, you get a stock on the company, which is good for the company because the company earns sort of growth on their stock, and also good for the customers, because we want to get these people to think about long-term investing, value investing, and being loyal for a company for the long term, and promote sort of a long-term gains for, say, complementing your super, versus what the Robin Hoods and other day trading, other startups want you to incentivize day trading and sort of being on the stock market for short-term gain versus long-term value building through a portfolio that you like the product and you are loyal to it. So I think that's very interesting in terms of how they, in the next few years, they will shape the savings of Australians and sort of help people on a way that they build long-term value. Another one that I recently invested is UPaged, which is a platform that is a marketplace that matches hospitals and nurses. So nowadays, the process to match like freelancing or sort of a nurses that will cover specific shifts is quite non-transparent, not good for the hospitals, nor for the nurses, because of the middle people, the agencies that do the process. So this UPage is making this much more simple, less friction. The nurses end up being paid more. The hospitals pay less, and they get nurses that are more qualified to the jobs they're looking for, which obviously translates to better care, lower costs for our healthcare systems, and in the end, a better service for the people who are in the hospitals, while still empowering the nurses to sort of get their careers on their hands and go directly to the hospitals instead of going through an agency, which obviously is a better solution for everybody in the end.
Okay. Building upon that, if as an investor, say if I'm a founder or an entrepreneur and I have a business and I want to pitch it to you, what are some things you're looking for in order to believe, like, yes, I'm going to invest in this company?
Well, I think it goes back to what I mentioned before. One is your market. Is it something that's big enough, scalable? On those two examples I just gave, yes, the markets are, the loyalty share programs in Australia are huge, and globally as well. It's very scalable even outside Australia. On the other one, nurses contracting is a huge market, can be expanded beyond nurses to other areas, for instance. So both classify that. And the other one is the founding team. So again, look at the people who are behind. Do they have this sort of resilience and grind that you see they will be able to make this happen? And second, are they passionate enough for this, about this product, about this problem? And I'll say, for instance, Zara, the CEO and founder of UPage, she's a nurse herself. She's been working these marketplaces for almost 10 years, sees the problems there, understands it very well, and now is building a product that she's very passionate about, and she knows deeply the industry.
Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, no, it's just UPage, like it sounds like such a wonderful idea. Like, I didn't even know that this problem existed. But the fact that you brought this problem forward, I'm like, wow, it needs to be solved, and then she's coming up with the solution. Yeah, I think it's just amazing. I think it touches upon back what we talked about earlier, which was that there is an opportunity for almost anyone to do something different, because, you know, with all the technology and all the sort of information that's out there, almost anything's possible as long as you're willing to put in the time and the effort. And so, yeah, I think just my last question is just, everything that you've sort of touched on has been sort of, I guess, been on the more realistic side of, you know, being an investment, and also on the side of an investee. And so you have shows out here like Dragon's Den and Shark Tank, sort of encouraging that, you know, you have to be sort of the next Bill Gates, or, you know, the next like Amazon, Elon Musk, something of that scale. Otherwise, you know, don't bother with starting a startup, right? But you have so many successful, much more smaller scale startups. And so what do you think are some common misconceptions within the entrepreneurial ecosystem that, you know, that you think should not be there or should be cleared up?
Well, that's a good question. I think on that particular point that you mentioned, starting there, I think between, say, Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, and not to be entrepreneurial at all, there's a huge space, right? In some senses, we talk about trillions of dollars, but if you make a startup that's already like not even a unicorn would be even very small compared to what they got, but even smaller than that, something that's, say, hundreds of millions or even dozens of millions, is still as an attractive proposition that can be something that might not be as flashy and famous, but can be rewarding enough that you build a product that, say, if it's 10 million, even 10 million of revenue, let's say, that's already big enough to mean that it's impacting a lot of people, a lot of customers. And that can be enough motivation to be exciting enough. Different people will have different, let's say, risk appetites or ambitions and or interest in what they're working on, right? Just because I tend to agree, you cannot get to the same level as Jeff Bezos, because there's one Jeff Bezos over, say, 6-7 billion people, right? So it's statistically speaking, it's going to be very hard, but there's lots of opportunity and lots of different ways to get to a place where it's rewarding enough for each of you, and every person will have their place differently. Another misconception I think is worth touching is that you need to ask for permission or need to get an investor behind you, you need to get someone to help you. While I think nowadays, most startups can be started by a single person, at least at to a certain level, to make an MVP, a product get out there. All you need is be able to talk to some customers, really understand what they need, and then depending on what the product is, you find other ways to build it. Even if you're not a technical co-founder, you can obviously work with no code startups. You can get most of these products for free nowadays. connect, patch together different solutions and make something that you can bring to the customer's hands and then let them test and reiterate and keep learning and improving. And then when you're ready, then you have already some loyal customers, then you can sort of try to raise some money behind it. Versus what I see many people think, oh, if I had a couple 100,000, it'll build something. But that's sort of the wrong mindset of an entrepreneur. If you're an entrepreneur passionate, you'll find a way to build something scrappy, get tested, patch it together. Even if you need to rebuild everything later, doesn't really matter. As long as you prove the concept traction, the other things will come later.
Yeah. No, that's very true.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And so I think that's a wonderful note to end on. That the first thing I think that we've touched on multiple times is that, you know, all the information is out there, and that, you know, if there's any time to begin a startup, the best time is now, right? In the 21st century, when, you know, the world is at your fingertips. And I think the second, as you touched on, to just blast through that misconception that, you know, you have to have a small loan of $1 million to get through that startup. You know, you can start from anywhere within your bedroom. And so, yeah, to anyone listening, right? You can do it. It's what Gigi says. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Gigi, for joining us today. Unfortunately, I think this sums up the episode 4, and yeah, deeply thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, we know we've you know, we've taken a chunk up out of your busy day, and so yeah, once again, like a wholehearted thank you for joining us, and also thank you to everyone who's listening. And so I think that about concludes that. And so we're signing off now. I'm Edward.
And I'm Vabe.
And this was the
Entrepreneurial Mindset.
See you guys.
Thank you.